All right. Well, good morning, good afternoon. For at least for Chris, it's afternoon. For me, I'm still like I need some more coffee. It's a little bit early here on the Pacific side, but Chris, you're on your second, you said, so you're good to go.
Yeah, 100%. I'm good to go, and so is Mona. So yeah, Mona and me,
Oh,
we're gonna learn
nice,
some
nice.
CLI today. So yeah.
Well, we welcome everyone to this series of sessions on GitHub Copilot CLI. And if you haven't heard about it, we're going to tell you all about it. We're going to be doing some hands-on stuff and taking questions and things like that. But let me introduce myself really quickly. My name is Dan Wahlin. I work for Microsoft in cloud advocacy. And I have my esteemed colleague, someone I love to work with, Chris Norring here. So introduce yourself real quick.
Yeah, thanks for that, Dan. So my name is Chris Norring. Me and Dan have been colleagues for quite a while right now. And yeah, we're both very excited to be here today for you all and teach you some Copilot CLI. Over to you, Dan.
Yes. So what we're going to be doing is going through a course that everybody could get to. And I'll show you a link right now, actually. So first off, in order to go through this particular course and what we're going to be doing, you, of course, would need the GitHub Copilot CLI. The course actually has a setup chapter, and I'll show you all this in just a moment. And so everything we're going to be doing in this session and the other three that are going to follow, we'll have another one tomorrow morning and then two more next week, is going to be in the terminal, the console, whatever you like to call it. And it's really, really easy to get started. And then we'll even talk about like, why would I use terminal versus, ChatGPT or some other option out there. So if you want to join with the content we're going to be covering, there's actually two options. The repo, which you will need, is this first one, this gh.io Copilot CLI course that you see right there. And that's what I'm actually going to be showing. However, if you prefer more of a web version of it, the repo has a link to this other one. And there's also kind of a web page version that's not so repo-like if you prefer that. So I'll show you what I mean here in just a sec when we jump into the coding and stuff. So what we're going to be doing is over these next 4 sessions, and we hope you'll be able to join us for as many of those as you can, because we're going to be breaking down the chapters of this GitHub Copilot CLI for Beginners course. And today, Chris and I are going to go through chapters 1 and 2. Chris has been kind enough to volunteer to address questions that come up. And then I'll be kind of bouncing ideas off him as we go along as well, so that we just kind of have a discussion, keep it more fun. And so the goal today is chapter 1, and this is kind of just an overview, like what is the CLI? Why would I use it? How do I get started? We'll have lots of demos. In fact, the whole thing's going to be pretty much demo. And then we're also going to get through chapter 2. Now, I'm not going to promise we're going to run every single prompt and every single thing in the chapter because we only have an hour. But we're going to run enough that you'll definitely understand the core concepts in each of these chapters. Then tomorrow, we'll kind of do the same thing with the next 2 chapters. And then next week, we'll have some other chapters that we're going to be covering. So in chapter 1, we're going to start off with just Chris and I kind of talking about like, why would you use CLI versus these other options? We're going to talk about something called modes, because there are different ways you can interact with this and use it for your code, for reviews, for testing. And then we'll get into chapter 2 a little bit later here. So as questions come up, feel free to drop those in. And Chris will be kind of monitoring. At the end of each chapter, we'll try to address those if he doesn't address them directly through typing. So with that, let's jump on in and fire this thing up. So if you go to the link that I mentioned, in fact, you'll see it right here, but the GH link I showed a little bit earlier, and I'll show it again in a moment. This is going to get you to the repo. Now, I mentioned that there's actually 2 ways you can view this course. One is through the repo, where I am here, and I'm just in VS Code, you can see. But if I scroll down, you'll notice if you prefer just a pure web page type thing, not a repo look, you can go to Awesome Copilot. Now, a real quick intro to Awesome Copilot, not only does it have a learning hub for these type of things like the CLI, but Chris, it also has some other cool stuff, right? Like walk us through real quick, what does Awesome Copilot offer?
Yeah, Dan. So awesome Copilot. This is a big storage for a lot of things Copilot, right? So imagine any kind of prompts, custom instruction, custom agents, skills. It's being updated all the time. It's a super popular repo. I think last time I checked was 10,000 stars, I think. So yeah, and this is all thanks to all of you in the user community. You tell us what you like and we put it in there. So definitely, per what Dan said, have a look. There are things we refer to today that's also covered in there, I think.
Yeah, it's a really nice resource. And we're going to, those things Chris just mentioned, like agents and skills and things like that, we're going to be covering throughout these series of sessions. So like I said, feel free to join all those. All right, with that, I'm going to go ahead and leave it here just on the repo, because if you do want to run what I'm going to run, you will clone the repo anyway. And I'll kind of walk you through that in just a moment. So just to reiterate on the prereqs for this, you need a GitHub account, which is obviously free to get. And then you need GitHub Copilot access in some way, shape, or form. Now, there is a free offering out there. Obviously, there's limits to that, but you can do it. Then there's the subscriptions, and there's even educational options. So there's some links in the course for that. And then you really just need to be comfortable running basic terminal commands. As you're going to see, even if you weren't comfortable with terminal commands, like Chris, I don't know about you, but all the time when I got to do something a little more complex that's a terminal command, I'll just ask Copilot CLI to do it.
I mean, I'm with you, Dan, right? Because there's so many things to learn, right? There's Bash, there's PowerShell, and then you have to remember the syntax, and then I just defer back to the AI, as you said, right? I think now we live in a time where we don't need to remember the syntax exactly anymore, and I think that's a good thing.
I do too, actually, because I waste way too much time looking stuff up. All right, now the last thing I want to cover before we dive in is GitHub Copilot CLI is part of a whole family of GitHub Copilot options. In fact, I'm in VS Code, and you'll notice right up top here, this little bubble. Well, this is also GitHub Copilot. It's just more of the GUI version, and it'll do the same type of things that we're going to show you in the terminal. And so we're going to spend just a minute or two talking about, like, why would I do that versus the terminal? What are the options there? But just kind of know there's options. It's great. And your one access point, as long as you have GitHub Copilot, you have access to both these. Now, there's some other things as well. So on GitHub, there's actually a chat option, and that's Copilot on GitHub. And there's even a way to delegate, not only from the terminal, but if you go and you want to delegate an issue you have on a GitHub repo to something called the GitHub Copilot Cloud Agent, recently renamed, by the way. It will actually do work for you up in the cloud. So there's a lot of GitHub Copilot options, but we're here for this guy right here. So I'm going to be using the terminal. Now, real quick discussion before we dive right in on why do I like to use the terminal? Because I know most of you have probably heard about Cloud Code or Codex or Open Code, and then, of course, Copilot CLI. These are all terminal based. And so for me, and I'll let Chris give his 2 cents here, but for me, I'm oftentimes running commands anyway. Like I'm running node commands or Python or pip or UV or whatever. If you're doing Java, you're running Java commands or .NET or whatever. And so a lot of times I'm already in the terminal anyway, and it just feels natural to me. But I don't know, Chris, what's your take on it? Because I know you use it a lot as well.
Yeah, totally, Dan. So I would say this about the terminal, because I was on the fence, if I'm completely honest, because I started I like my editor and my Copilot in there. But then I started to think about as you said, there are a few things you do in the terminal, right? But then I started thinking, what if I actually use it for more things than just, my occasional commands that I would use in there? So now I'm actually starting to add features. I'm starting to build apps. So I would say for a lot of you, this is a wake-up moment for this course, right? Because you're going to notice how actually useful the terminal is for a lot of things. So I don't know if you had that kind of awakening moment, Dan, or if you already felt like, oh, the terminal is definitely one of my go-tos,
I did actually. I had always used, let's face it, most of us, I think, would use Copilot on the web or ChatGPT or, whatever option, because there's a lot of them. And then you kind of copy and paste back and forth, right? And that, it worked. It was kind of we'll call it the prehistoric days of AI, because while it worked, it wasn't the best because you had to copy and paste and it wasn't editing your code directly. Whereas now, like you just said, we can build full-on apps from the terminal, which we're going to dive into right now. So I love it, actually. I always worked in the terminal a lot anyway, even though I'll have to admit I'm a little rustier on some of my commands I used to use a lot. But you'll see what I mean as we jump in here. So with that, let's jump in here. So the quick start will actually walk you through getting it installed. All right, we're not going to worry about that. The only thing you would have to do to get started once it's installed is type Copilot. This will fire it up, and it has the world's coolest banner that pops up here. I love it. There's a way you can actually, in settings, I think it's like banner true or something like that. You can make it always appear. So I leave it on because I really like it. Now, the first thing you would normally do is you'd log in, and I'll show you the command for that. Now, I've already logged in. So you'll notice here it says for the session, which the chat session basically that I have going right here. Do I want to store this in my account, in this repository, or just on this overall device so it'd be used across repositories? I'm going to go ahead and just say in my account. So I'm going to hit enter. This is kind of a newer thing, by the way, that's popped up. And notice I'm in. Now, normally what you would have to do is type login, and then that will give you a website link and a code, and you just go plug it in, log into your GitHub account with the account that has access to Copilot, and that's it. You're off and running. It's like super, super easy to do. I'm not going to tempt fate and re-log in because, I just don't want to mess up, it's working. But it's really, really easy to get started. The quick start has screenshots of what it looks like, and so really easy. Now, with that, let's start things off. We're going to go and cover chapter 1 now. So let me kind of run. I'm going to leave it side by side like this. And what I'm going to do is just say, hey, what can you do for me? And let's just see what it does. Now, while it's loading, I want to call your attention right here to the bottom right. Notice I'm using Claude Sonnet 4.6 in this case. And depending on your subscription, you're going to have access to these different models. And that's one thing I love about Copilot CLI is you don't have access to just one family of models. There's actually a whole bunch. And I'll show you that a little bit later as we move along. But notice when I type / like for login, see there's a bunch of commands here. In fact, I can just use the arrow keys to kind of go through these. All right, I have a bunch of Azure stuff, and a lot of this is custom, by the way. So don't worry, you're not going to see all that. There's even some codex stuff. But all these commands that you see here, these are called / commands. And so throughout this series and throughout this course, you're going to see a lot about / commands. And the good news is, I don't know about you, Chris, but there's probably 5 that I use all the time. And then the others, I can go look up if I forgot them. But notice right here, helpful commands. So let me scroll up because here's what it gave us. So, hey, what can you do for me? And notice it went out and it actually checked its documentation. Okay, that's kind of cool. So it's up to date. So coding tasks. Well, Chris and I, this is pretty much where we live, right? We're writing code, we're debugging code, we're making code better, whatever. You can even run shell commands. If I type a bang here, see how it switched to shell? Let me do that again. Bang. I could just run a Node command or a Python command or a Java command or whatever right here from the shell. That's why I love it, because I'm already in the shell. If we move on down, there's integration with PRs, with GitHub. I use it all the time. In fact, just yesterday, I did some updates on this course and went through the Copilot CLI to do those updates, actually. We're going to talk about agents and skills and MCP servers throughout this series. It can do that. It can work with your files. And again, the list goes on and on and on. Lots of cool stuff. So now that we've done that, let me show you what we could do. So I have this repo opened. It does have code. There's some code in the samples folder. But most of these are the chapter readmes, the markdown files that are generating what you see right here. So let's pretend that, this is, let me go back, and that's not what I want it to do. There we go. Let's go back and let me go back to here, reload it. Go back to here. All right. And let's ask it questions about this repo just really quickly here. So I'm going to say I have about 20 minutes to cover chapter 01. Give me a short bulleted list of the main, topics to cover. This is on the fly, folks. Gotta love it. So let's see what it does. I already know what I'm going to cover, but let's see what it thinks I should cover. And then, Chris, you'd be like, yeah, Dan, you should have covered that. You didn't tell me about that one.
Yeah.
All right. So notice it's now showing these tools that it's calling. So it's listing a directory. There's the 01. It then read the README. It got all the headings. And then here we go. So installation and setup, install the CLI, authenticate. We talked about that. First prompts, we're going to run some, we're going to run some others, but I already ran kind of the hello world. What can you do for me? And then we're going to talk about modes coming up. And then there's some things I mentioned, models, for example. So yeah, that's pretty good, actually. So let's go ahead and let's try this out. I'm going to scroll down here, and we've already started Copilot, obviously. And let's just run this guy right here. Explain what a data class is in Python in simple terms. All right. Now, I'm not going to run all these because you'll get the idea. But Chris has done a lot with Python, even including books, by the way. So, Chris, tell me, I don't know, does that look good to you?
Yeah, I think it does. And honestly, this is one of my favorite use cases with agents, right? To just have it explain things to me or have me learn new things, right? So I honestly think I've been writing some books while learning in the process, because there's no better way, right? Go on in the deep end and write a book, do a talk, whatever. But yeah, this looks good to me.
Yeah, I mean, and here's the cool thing, as you're going to see as we move along, when it edits code or shows you code or whatever, because normally I'm not using it to show me code here. Normally I'm using it to edit files and things like that, of course. There's a lot of times where I do look at it, and this is one of those things where I think the question, Chris, always comes up. What's going to be my role as a developer if these tools are doing a lot of the coding for me? And I'll let you give your take, Chris, but my take on it is it's more important than ever to actually know what you're doing. Know your language, know your architecture, know your framework, know how to troubleshoot. Because it'll help you a ton. But there are absolutely times, I'm sure, Chris, you would agree, where it'll go down maybe a rabbit hole that was the wrong hole. And you got to kind of be like, no. Why are you doing that? So knowing what you're doing here and the skills that you all have as developers is still like super critical. Chris, any thoughts on that at all?
Yeah, so I got a visual in my head just as we were talking about this, because for me it's about up leveling, but the image I got was actually first riding a horse, just me, right? And then imagine that I go back to a coach, right, in the Old West, and suddenly I'm controlling 7 or 8 horses at the same time. And that's kind of the visual I see, right? Suddenly you are scaling yourself, and exactly what you said, Dan, all the skills you've learned as an engineer, they are not a waste. This is how the agents will succeed because of you. Right? It's not without you. It's called a Copilot for a reason. So yeah, my take is that we've definitely up-leveled. We're more like directing an entire orchestra instead of just being us on a single instrument.
I love the analogy of the horses, because that's pretty much my day right there. Is I'm like leading the horses so we go in the right direction. You still have to know how to work with them. And that's where, like, I've been in the business a long time. Chris has as well. I'm even longer because I'm getting older. But, for 20 years, I ran a consulting company before I came to Microsoft. And knowing architectures, especially, and security and things like that was, super critical. Well, guess what? I would argue it's even more critical now, because now tools like Copilot and all the others out there are generating all this code. So now we got to keep up and review it and things like that. Cool. All right, well, let's move along here. So I'm going to show you another little demo. So I mentioned earlier that this repo, and let me just real quick in case anybody joined us a little bit later. So the repo we're at, if you go to this GitHub gh.io/copilot-cli-course. All right, I'll leave that up just one sec here so everybody can get to it, just in case anyone joined us later. That's where I'm at right now. All right, and that's what we're going to be going through again in these 4 sessions that Chris and I are going to do. Okay, so once you get there, one of the things that the course is going to have you do is clone the repository. Now, the reason, again, is because in the repository, we have some code. We have some C# and JavaScript and, Python and some others. We even have some buggy code, just to leverage the CLI to say, hey, catch bugs, in this code that someone else wrote in a project, for example. And so you don't need to memorize this at all because it's obviously in the course. But this is something you'll definitely want to clone, bring down to your machine, and then you can do the things I'm going to do here. So one of those is, notice this review, and there's the samples. Now, we're going to talk about this more in the second chapter, the next chapter coming up today. I'll give you a sneak peek. It's really just going to say, use this file as you're making your decisions. That it's adding to what we call the context, and we'll talk about that coming up here. So I'm just going to grab this, paste it in, and that little guy right there, it doesn't really matter, but I'll delete it. All right, so review at samples. Okay, the at is basically a way to tell the CLI, I'd like you to use this file. And again, we'll talk about it more in the next chapter, but a little sneak peek. For code quality issues and suggest improvements. Now, this is a fantastic way, if you're new to using AI with your code, this is a great way to review maybe something you've written or your team or others. And let me go ahead and start it while we're talking here. Because 9 times out of 10, maybe 8 times out of 10, I don't know, I'm making it up here, but a lot, it will give me suggestions about code I wrote that I'm like, oh, that's a fantastic idea. I should have thought to do that. And so notice in the list here on code quality, let me scroll back up here. So we got some good stuff. There's a lot of checks, but there's also no type hints, it says, on functions. Okay. That's on purpose, by the way, but there's no input validation for title and author and things like that. Looks like handle remove doesn't validate empty input before it looks. And this app you're going to see will actually go out, and it's just a real simple console app that'll go out and find books that are in kind of a JSON type file. So it's not a super complex app, but it's just enough to be able to use the CLI throughout the course. And just to reemphasize, there's I think 3 or 4 versions of this. There's a JavaScript and a C#, and so I guess 3 versions, and a Python. All right, so that's pretty cool. Like it actually gave me a little bit of insight into what's going on. And Chris, I don't know about you, but I'm constantly using this type of this type of prompt to like analyze code AI is generating, like all the time. What about you? Do you run reviews a lot, or?
Yeah, so it's interesting, right? Because I tend to use one of 2 angles. Either I use these kind of review prompts or I set things up. And I think we have this later in the course, but there's such a way of setting up custom agents that could be a reviewer, for example, right? So there are different ways of doing it, but definitely have that top of mind as an engineer. I need to verify the output. So yeah, I think this is a great call out to show this can be done with a prompt, but this could also be part of a skill or part of a custom agent doing the same thing. But again, you are the engineer, you are the one providing the guidance, what the review process should look like.
And to kind of go on what Chris just said, later in the series, when we talk about agents and skills, you could literally, it has a built-in review feature. We're going to cover that later when we get to agents. But as Chris said, you could build your own team review agent or skill, and we'll talk about the difference. And that is a big deal because every team has different guidelines and rules that you end up having to follow, right? Well, you could build that in. So it's just like one command, like my team review. And then that agent or skill, whatever it turns out to be, would have all your rules and guidelines just built in. And that's all you have to do. You don't have to copy and paste this massive prompt every time. So we'll talk about that a little later as we go through the course. All right, so let's move on in. Now, one thing I want to point out that's kind of cool, Copilot was used to make this, by the way. I had to figure out how to do it, is when you see it in actions, it actually has kind of a live, it's just an animated GIF, whatever your preference is. But it actually runs these samples. So even if you couldn't run them right at that time, you can actually see them in action. All the code, there's a tool called VHS, tape, and others. I had never used them before, ever. And with Copilot CLI, in fact, all the code's in this repo right here that it generated. And that's how I'm actually generating these guys. I could generate MP4s or GIFs or whatever. So pretty cool. That's a perfect example where there is no way I would have had time to research all that and put it together on my own, because it's not an area, number one, I care that much about, generating little clips of the CLI, for example. But I do care for the course because it's kind of cool to be able to, go in and see it in action. So anyway, that's an example that was actually generated with the CLI. Okay, so the takeaway so far, you can get a code review in seconds. And I know we only reviewed one file, but you could do way more than that. Okay, now I'm not gonna run every single one of these because, as I mentioned, we only have about an hour, but I think everybody kind of gets the idea. You can go run these prompts, just pop it in right there, and you're kind of off and running. So I'm gonna move on down and show you some other modes that Copilot CLI has. So first off, if we want to get out of this, we could just type exit, or you could do Control C. If you're like me, it's always Control C, Control C, Control C, Control C, because it feels like it doesn't take it the first time. Not just this, anything. I'm kind of the same way with copy, Chris. I'm like, I'm on Mac, but I'm like Command C, Command C, Command C.
Yep.
I don't know. Maybe that's maybe I need counseling, but yeah. So moving on down, Chris, we could totally use this to just write code, of course, but if you had a bigger project, where would you start normally before you write the code in the real world? Like, what would you probably do?
I would probably take a step back and stand in front of a whiteboard and start planning things, right? So I would start to think, what's my domain like? What are the things? What are the big concepts? How do they relate? What does that mean? What kind of problems am I solving? So I'd probably write that down. So I bet there's a command out there that can allow me to just fit in that domain, right?
I don't know, Chris. It's the first time we've ever used it. Yeah, okay. I might have led you a little bit on that. So yes, there are actually 3 modes, technically 4. There's this thing called autopilot, but we're not going to cover that today. But as Chris mentioned, there is a plan mode. And this is absolutely my first go-to mode on every bigger project I do, on a big feature, even if it's a small feature, like maybe I have a security fix I got to do, but there's a lot of moving parts to it. Instead of just trying to type up a prompt and hoping it gets it right, I'll switch into plan mode. And so we'll talk about that in just a second. Interactive mode is what we're doing right now. All right, so we're just, hello there. And that's interactive mode. It responds, you get your answer, all those types of things. And then there's also programmatic mode. And I'll show you an example of that in a moment, but that's where I just want to run a one-off command. And this can be run even in like a CI/CD system, your continuous integration builds and things like that. You can actually use it there to say, hey, go run this, AI thing. get the results, and then determine maybe that changes the build or changes the deployment or whatever it is you're doing. So there's a lot of things you can do there, and that's called programmatic. So if we break this down, plan mode, as you see here, is kind of like if we had, let me make this just a little bigger for you temporarily. If we had a restaurant we want to go to, but we've never been to this city, we've never been to the restaurant. We need a way to figure out how to get there. And I think we're all, pretty good. I don't know where I put my phone. I was going to say, oh, here it is. I think we're all pretty good at pop up the phone and use your mapping, tool to do whatever it is you're going to do. All right, that's kind of like plan mode. You're planning the route that you're going to go. Now, once you get to the restaurant, let's say it's a sit down one and there's a waiter or waitress. You would then obviously interact. If it's the first time you've been to this restaurant, you might say, what do you think about this dish? Or what do you think, how's the pasta? How's the steak? Whatever it is you like. That's interactive, right? You're talking to the waiter or the waitress. Well, that's what we're doing over here right now. So we're currently in interactive mode. And then you have programmatic mode. This would be like driving through a fast food restaurant. You're driving through, I don't know, McDonald's or whatever it is you have at your place. And you're ordering, you're getting the thing, and then you're done, right? It's like a one-time shot. That's programmatic mode. All right. So if we move on down, this is what programmatic mode looks like right here. See this Copilot -P? Well, I wouldn't run that in here. I would actually run that in a separate command prompt. And so I would literally just say, once this comes up here, once my shell loads, there we go, be clear, Copilot -P, and then, what's the weather in Phoenix? Yeah, probably not a good prompt, but you get the idea. And then we just let it do its thing. It's just a one-off call. Right. So I'm going up to the drive-in. Here's what I ordered at the drive-through. And then they're going to give me back something here, hopefully in a moment. And then boom, we're done. And so, this will come back in a little bit. So the bottom line is you have these three modes. And the one that I find myself using all the time is interactive. But watch this. If I say /plan, in fact, I can just hit enter there if I want, but I'm going to say, I'd like, and typos don't matter, but for some reason I always go fix them because it's really good at dealing with typos. I like to add a new book feature that calls an API named, I don't know, doesn't matter, foo. Let's say it's /foo. Please create a plan in, let's say Python, to make this call securely. Now I'm going to go further and say, store this in the root. It'll actually put what it generates in a specific session area. I like to be able to reference those later to see what I did and how it evolved. So I'm going to say stored in, I don't know, let's just call it my plan. .markdown. All right. So I'm going to let it go, and look what happened down here at the bottom. As Chris mentioned, you could switch into plan mode. So now it is not going to change any code or do anything like that. It's just going to go into plan mode, and look what it's doing. It's kind of reasoning about, all right, the user wants me to do this. What does the foo API do? Well, that's a good question since I didn't tell it. Let me think about what's ambiguous here and how should I fix it? Now it's starting to ask me questions because it's going, I don't have enough context. And this is the difference between if Chris just gives it a prompt interactively, it's just going to execute that prompt in most cases. And a lot of times it might get it wrong in this case because there wasn't enough context, right? So now it's going to say, what does the foo API do? Is it internal, external? I'm just going to make this up here, but let's just do number one and we'll let it kind of do its thing here. And so notice it's gathering requirements. All right. Now, how should the API be authenticated? Let's say it was an API key. Sure. And so see how it's asking things that I didn't provide it, and I should have, to be real honest, I should have. Here's another one. So when a book is found via the API, what should happen with the result? Add it to the local collection. Now, it knows I have a local collection, by the way. That means, okay, that's kind of cool. Sure, let's do that. Now, again, it's not going to write any code yet. Right now, it's just going to pretty much generate a markdown that I'll show you here. Okay, so now it says I have enough context. Let me analyze the existing code and write the plan. So what's going to happen here is in just a moment, we will hopefully see a plan dot or my plan dot markdown file show up here in just a moment. And you're going to see that, I don't know about you, Chris, but I oftentimes look at the plan and go, wow, that was way better than I would have written up.
Yeah, so yeah, 100%. I think that's always the case, right? But one thing I want to say is that us humans, we have a lot of assumed context. We already know that when we give a high level prompt that, hey, I'm probably going to use SQLite. I'm probably going to use some kind of auth provider. I'm probably going to do this and that, and maybe a reverse proxy and so on. So I think it's a good thing that the agent is asking us for all these things because we assume too much, right? So yes, I am super impressed by that markdown. And no, I don't want to write any of that. So I'm grateful for it asking the right questions and doing a long write-up because I don't know about you, Dan, but I don't ever want to write a big domain description ever again.
No. Well, and like you said, we assume so much. Like we have so much knowledge about our domain area that it's really easy to go, oh, well, it'll figure that out. Or, like we all know that. Of course it can't. I mean, the LLM's up there in the cloud. It knows nothing about your domain. So yeah, here's what it wrote. So it literally wrote up a problem, an approach, specific to-dos. I love having to-dos because then it has guardrails on like, how do you know you're successful if you implement this feature? Well, now we have these guardrails with these to-dos. And a lot of times what I'll tell it once I execute the plan is I will go in and tell it, add one of those green check marks, the emojis, next to the to-do as you complete it. Because that way I know exactly what happened. So notice it's adding environment files. It's even going, hey, I'm going to add some tests. Not a bad idea. Testing, by the way, is a fantastic use case for the CLI. If you're always like, I don't have time for tests, you do now, or you should. So security considerations, files to create. So look at the whole plan. Now, going back over to Copilot, do you want to edit it? Or no, tell Copilot what to do differently. Like, I don't like it at all. Now it's kind of up to me to guide it. Now, unfortunately, we don't have time to run this feature because I don't even have the API. But that's what plan mode can actually do. So I'm going to go ahead and escape out of that. But that plan that would have shown up had I said, yes, go ahead and do it, it would just show up right there. Next step is then you'll get to a point where it'll say, all right, would you like me to execute the plan? And then you do it. Now, notice I'm in plan mode still, right? Describe a plan. But notice that I can actually kind of filter through different things here. So if I go, for instance, back and go to these guys, I can jump right out of plan mode. I can do, kind of whatever I want. But there's a lot of different options here that you can do. And while I don't have time to do a whole plan, because that would take more time than we have today, it's a really cool way to interact with all this. So definitely something to check out. All right. So with that, Chris, before we were getting close to the end of the chapter here, and we've now talked about the 3 interaction modes and things like that. I don't know if this one returned. Let me see here. Ask of yeah, it says I don't have access to real-time weather data. That's why earlier I said that's probably not a great prompt, but it did try to do it. All right, so that's kind of cool. Before we move on, though, I was kind of saying here. Let me actually move on down. How often, Chris, then would you say, like, if I give you a percentage, what percentage of the time are you going through plan mode, would you say, versus just jump right into interactive? I know I'm putting you on the spot.
Ooh, good one. It's a very good question, though, because honestly, I think I kick off plan mode almost all the time because I have an idea and, 20 minutes later I have a working app, right? So I tend to jump into plan mode because there's some idea that I want to get out there. The interactive one is great, I think, when I want to know what a project does. So my favorite use case is just saying, oh, here's a new GitHub repo. I don't know it. So I'm going to start querying and say, how does this thing work? What are the moving parts? So I see, if I want to know about source code, then I would say interactive 100%. If I want to just take an idea, build it, it's plan mode. So it depends on the use case, I would say.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Totally agree. I do the same thing. Plan mode is like my go-to, if you had your Batman tool belt, plan mode is like the tool that I probably use the most when I start. Very helpful. Now, real quick, if I hit Shift Tab, I want to show you real quick. Autopilot, that's another thing you can do. I'm back to interactive mode if it doesn't really say anything. Back to plan mode. So that's how you can kind of toggle between them. Or if I just want to get out in general, I can type exit, of course, and restart it. But I want to show you to wrap up because we still have chapter 2 to jump in. There's other things I can do. If I want to clear out everything we did, if I want to start kind of from scratch, in essence, clear out the context, clear out the memory, if you will, then I can type clear. Now, everything that we just did is kind of gone now. All right. And so when you do that, it's kind of like, start over. Maybe I screwed up or something. You can also do /help. If you just want to get some help, like what are hotkeys, things like that. All the commands, notice. Okay, so you never have to memorize this stuff, just /help. Now, I did mention I wanted to cover /model real quick. If I do that, I'm on Claude Sonnet 4.6, and because I have an internal kind of build here, you'll see some other stuff that won't be out there. But notice I can just use the arrow keys to switch, and look at all these models I can choose from. It's super cool. You're not locked into just one family. You have a lot of different options. So I'll go ahead and leave it on this. One thing I do want to mention. Now, notice off to the right, you'll see 1x, 0.33, 3x. This is an internal one, so ignore that one. But most of these are 1x. These are basically the models you're using for your subscription. How much does it use up of the premium requests, in essence? So it's just a normal 1x, or this one you can go a long ways, haiku. So if you have really simple tasks you're doing, this model could probably handle it and use way less requests from your subscription. But anyway, that's kind of another thing to look at is if you're running something really simple, you might just jump down to this guy and try it, or maybe this guy. GPT 5.4 is really good, actually. Okay, we've already looked at plan. Another one I love is research. I can just say, like, I need to research this topic that I'm new to, just type your prompt there. It'll go out to the web, it'll bring it all back and consolidate it and give you a nice little summary of what it is you want it to research. Very useful. And then we've talked about exits. So at the end of these, and this will be kind of your homework for those that are interested, there's going to be some try it, and I want to jump down to the assignment. There's also an assignment at the end that'll kind of put all these things that Chris and I have been talking about together. So that'll kind of be the homework if you want it. Up to you. All right. With that, Chris, do we have any questions that we need to address before we move on? Given we have only about 15 minutes, I realize, but we'll be all right.
Yeah, so I just want to build on top of what you said there about /model. So we actually support a lot of different providers because people were asking, how do I bring my own Ollama or Foundry Local, right? So I just wanted to say that we are actually supporting 3 different providers, OpenAI, and through OpenAI, we support, Ollama, Foundry Local, what have you. We also support it through Azure and also Anthropics if you want to use that. So one thing you can do to check out how to set that up is to do Copilot help providers. So that would be a way to get even more models, per what you said there, Dan, about selecting between different models.
Excellent call out. Yeah.
Yeah. So with that, I think we can probably move on. But I'm just thinking a lot of people have been asking about how do I bring my own local models? So
nice. Yeah. And a new feature, which I'm thinking this is new as of like 2 or 3 weeks ago, is bring your own key. So that because you might work in like I've worked with financial institutions, for example, that They have very strict regulations on what they're allowed to call for the model. And so they might have to call into, let's take a government agency, for example, a government regulated model that's out there that they can get to. Whereas the ones that Chris and I were talking about here, these are not obviously going to fall into the government regulated, whatever that means. But with bring your own key, and this is all in the docs, you could still call that. So like Chris said, you have a lot of options. Cool. All right. Well, to wrap up, we're going to go through chapter 2. And I've already talked a little bit about this, and that is going to be context. So, Chris, if I came into you, let's say that I report up to you and I'm on your developer team, and I come into you and say, hey, the book app doesn't work. What's probably going to be your response to me if that's all I give you?
I'm probably gonna ask, where does this book app live? What technologies does it use? And also probably what kind of problem this is causing for you. Like, are you not able to take this on a user group or conference? So what you said there, Dan, a lot of context that, could enable me to enable you, so to speak.
Exactly. And if you recall earlier, I showed you all the @ symbol where we could pull in a file. That's adding context. We're telling it you need to know about this or this or this. Like, for example, the foo API I made up earlier for the plan. Well, normally when I'm making the plan, I would give it all the context about the foo API, so it knows what it is, what data does it accept, what does it return, all those type of things. Or I'll even ask it, you go figure it out sometimes. Context makes all the difference. And I'm sure you've all seen this, again, with Copilot on the web or ChatGPT or Grok or whatever you use out there. If you don't give it good context, it's not going to give you a great answer. I mean, it's no different than me going to Chris and, hey, Chris, I need you to solve this for me. And that's all I say. And of course, Chris is going to go, what does this mean? So we can provide context several different ways. One is that @ syntax that we've already looked at. So in Copilot, if I want to go in and, let's go, for example, let's go into samples. Let's go into the JS one, and notice there's a package.json here. In fact, I'm just going to say copy path, just save me a little typing, but no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to show you something else you can do. Let me hide this real quick. So if I go in and say, tell me about packages in @ I'm going to type package.json and see what comes up here. Well, there it is, the second one right there. Yeah, I can select that one, but that's the one I was just showing you. I was going to copy the path, but I realized I don't really need to because it will do it. So I'm going to hit enter there. And let's run it. And so now I'm providing context, of course, because I gave it the file. The @ tells it, pull in this file's context. The tool kicks off. And now I don't think this has a whole lot of packages in it, but here we go. That's not bad. Nice little table there it gave us. So it tells us we have a test command, a start command. Yeah, there's not a whole lot of packages on this one. It's mostly just code. So, all right, that's an example of using the @ symbol to actually do something with that. Now, it's not only for just files. You could actually do entire folders. I could say summarize the @ I'm trying to remember. Well, let's just go to samples. It'll tell me. Let's go down to that JS, and I'm just going to select the folder. I need to understand the code, be succinct, be to the point. And I'll let this run while we continue, but you can give it a whole folder. You can give it multiple files, all that type of stuff. And so, like, for example, see this one here, where instead of just a single file, I'm giving it, hey, I'd like you to pull in multiple files for the context, or I want you to pull in the whole folder. And here we go. So it's telling me the files. It tells me what they do. We have a book collection. There's some CLI commands that can be run. Some notable detail, Whether or not that's useful for your scenario, you'd have to evaluate, but that's pretty cool, right? And so if we wanted to go in and explain that one right there instead of the whole thing, we just do it. So very, very simple to do. All right, now as mentioned, we can also reference folders. We can reference multiple files. Here's an example of that right here. And so we have 2 files, but you'll notice that utils.py is a UI helper, has 4 functions. Here's the summary of what the functions do. Super cool. Very easy to understand. And I don't know about all of you, but back in especially my pure engineering and consulting days, and I know, Chris, you worked in the consulting world as well, a lot of times you're thrown into a project that you did not write. And you're expected to be the expert and add a new feature or give advice on how to modernize it, whatever it may be. Back in the day, that was pretty time intensive because you would have to then, especially if you didn't have access off-site, which a lot of times I didn't because I worked with government agencies and finance companies back then. And so you had to do it while you're on site, which means you had to really be sort of on the ball thinking quick. And Chris, I know you did this too, right? It was challenging, right?
Yeah, I mean, interesting days for sure, but somehow it made, I don't know if the word here is fungible, but it felt like your brain had to learn at high speed all the time. So it made us better in a sense. So it's one of those things I think about with AI agents is are we actually offloading too much? So I would just keep that in mind as we use the AI tools. Are you just stopping to think, or are you using it to empower you to think? I would just try to differ between the two.
I would totally agree. And earlier, if you recall, Chris and I talked about it's more important than ever, I think, that you have a really good understanding of your domain at work. Not just languages, but your architectures, your frameworks, your coding. More important than ever, I would argue. Everybody, I keep hearing in the social networks that, oh, it's not going to matter anymore. Da da da. I'm like, no, come on. It matters more than ever if you know what you're doing, because now there's more code than ever. Somebody's got to actually validate it. So, all right. So when it comes to working across files, I've already talked about it can totally do that. So, if we wanted to go in and say, how do these files work together? What's the data flow between them? Just like you saw it output here, it could totally do that. All right. So moving on down, I've already run on the folder. So I've already run this demo of understanding a code base, but I would argue this is pretty accurate here. If you were to read through an entire folder with quite a few files manually, easily, let's say 30 minutes, easily, maybe an hour, maybe more. It just depends on how much code's in there, right? Whereas now in 10 seconds, you can get a high level understanding like this, which can then help you maybe focus what you're looking at as you go through that. So super, super useful. Again, it doesn't mean you don't need to know it. It can just help augment what you know and your focus is what I would argue. All right. So moving on down, one thing I want to show you here is here's one on multi-factor multi-file refactoring. I'm going to go ahead and grab this one and run it, because what it's basically saying is that, hey, I see that there might be some issues here on duplicate items. Now, I'm going to show you one command here real quick called context. This is what is currently being sent up to the LLM. So you'll notice I have a lot of tools, almost 60K. That's because I have a lot of agents and skills and some things we're going to cover later. I could disable those if I want to minimize that. You'll see I've used up about 65K of 200K. Because what'll happen is once you approach the 200K, there's only a window that's so big, and you can't shove any more in the window. So what Copilot will do is go in and actually give a summary. It'll compact so that we can take a summary of what we were using before and then move on to kind of a fresh new context. You can always see what's in your context. So like my messages, not bad, 5.2K. That's this stuff up here. that I sent earlier because it wants to preserve that history. I still have a ton of free space. You know, there's always a buffer it adds of this 20%. And then once I approach that buffer limit, it'll compact and then create a whole fresh window. And it does that automatically for you. So the reason I wanted to point that out is as you're working with a whole bunch of files like we're doing, that is going to add to your context, of course. But all right, so let me just, I didn't want that one. I must have copied that. Let me just grab this guy really quick. We're getting close to time here. Got a little bit more I want to cover. So we're going to let this run while we kind of wrap up here and talk about sessions. That's our kind of last main thing to cover, and then we'll wrap up today. But what this is going to do is go analyze. It's going to put those two files into the context, look for duplication, and then basically suggest, hey, here's how you can fix it. Pretty cool. All right. Now, while it's doing that, everything we're doing here is a session. Okay, there you go. Here's what it did, by the way. So notice it's suggesting we delete this guy, we consolidate, and just make this one call from both. That's a pretty good suggestion. It looks like that's it right there. Those are the main things it suggests. Okay, cool. Now, do I want it to edit? Notice this, by the way, we haven't really seen this a whole lot yet. Because there's a mode I can run in where I don't have to approve things. We're in what I would recommend you start in mode, which is as it has questions, it's not going to make assumptions and like just update files. It's going to ask you. I highly recommend you start out with that. If it's a trusted code base and later you determine I'm tired of answering yes, then you can override that. We're not going to talk about that today, but it is going to come up later in the sessions. So just as a heads up. Now, I don't want to do this right now, so I'm just going to hit escape because we're just playing around here, but you can see that's pretty cool. It refactored it, took out some code I don't need at that point. But everything we're doing here is a session. So what happens if I exit and then tomorrow I want to pick right up, you know, maybe Chris and I are talking about it in a team meeting. And I'm like, yeah, I need to get back to that, what I was doing. There's a couple things I can do. If I type Copilot, and let me scroll down here. If you want to continue the last thing you did, when you start it back up, you can type -- continue. That's just automatically going to go to wherever the last session was you had running. Now, maybe you don't remember if it was the last session or 2 sessions ago or whatever. You can also do this, -- resume. Now, if I do that, you're going to get a menu option here. I'll show you what it looks like as it loads. And now it's going to say, where were these? I'm going to say it was in my account. And there we go. See all these sessions and see the names, the summaries over here to the right. So what's so cool about this is you can pick up right where you left off. And I do this all the time because if you're like me, you stay up way too late sometimes because you're on a roll, generating code. Chris, you never do this, I'm sure. And then you're like, all right, I got to get to bed. And then tomorrow, I just pick right up where I left off. Pretty cool. So that's what you can do there. Now, you can also rename your sessions, by the way. There's a rename command. You can actually come in and say, I want to call it the foo session. I don't know, just to make it more obvious so you can pick it. Pretty cool. So this is something we've already talked about, these guys that are really, really useful to know about. There's one more I'm going to throw at you and then we'll wrap up here. So we've already talked about context. That gets you to this guy to see what's in your window. We've talked about exit, of course. That's or Control C. Clear, I want to completely wipe out the window. I want to start a brand fresh new, session. Another really cool thing, I'll have to admit, I don't use this as much because I just typically use Git, but you can rewind and basically rewind to an earlier stage in that session. Like maybe you screwed up something big time, but a little bit earlier in the session, it was good. So you can say, rewind, go back, in other words. Or notice it's kind of like undo. That's also pretty cool. I don't know, Chris, do you use that one much? I don't use that as much, I'll have to admit, but I have.
I don't think I've actually used it, but it looks useful, honestly. I can see situations where I would use it, yeah.
I've screwed up for sure, but usually, like I said, what I'll do is run into the Git history and kind of fix it from there. I've learned to commit more often than I might have used to as I'm, doing these Copilot CLI stuff, because it can generate a lot of cool stuff. So the bottom line here is sessions, they persist across, multiple days. And you can get back to it and continue. You can resume an older session. Super, super useful. And so that's kind of this section. All right, now there's a whole bunch more we could go into. This is all bonus in the chapter 2. I'll let you all do that. The last thing to wrap up is, again, there's an assignment here. Now, the final thing I want to cover, and then we'll get you out of here for the day, is a brand new thing that just came out literally, I think, Monday. What are we, Wednesday today? It's called Remote. Check this out. I can now, from my browser, or if you have an early version of GitHub on your mobile, I can actually open this in my browser. Now, it only works for your account, by the way. But if I do Control E, there's I can now scan this on my phone if I wanted. I'm going to take that out, but I can actually open this link here. Let me show you. Let me sign in. All right, hold on. I got to do all the Chris knows about this very well, because we have a whole sign-in process we have to do. So just 1 second here. A lot of security internally. And I'm almost in. All right, there we go. Now, imagine this was on my phone, though. Okay, let me get out of full screen mode. So I can drag this over. You don't need to see all those. And here we go. This works on your mobile, works on your desktop. I can now interact with this session from anywhere. This just came out like Monday. And so now on my phone, I can take this same link, or again, if you get an early version of the GitHub app, it's not on the released one yet. It will be coming. I can now do all the same stuff that we were doing earlier. So I could go in and ask questions. I could tell it to do this on my code. I do this all the time. I have, because I use some other tools to do this, because I could be at a restaurant and be like, oh, I got a great idea. Boop, 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 type it in, let it fly. And then when I get back in the office, I can, or my room here, I can check it out. So that is a brand new feature. It is in preview, just as a heads up. But all you got to do is say /remote, and boom, you can start using this on, your tablet, your phone, do it remotely and work on it anywhere you want. Super cool. So with that, we are at the end, folks. So I hope, let's go back to here to I'm going to skip ahead here to wrap up. But Chris, let's wrap up. Any other questions come in?
Now, I would just like to add that remote thing is probably going to be my favorite thing, right? Because I think about it as a way to shorten the time I spend in commute and going back and forth to work. Sure, I work from home, but sometimes, right, you just wish you could get work done in your car, in your train. So I hope everyone who saw that thinks like, oh, sweet, I got an hour and a half to work. I can actually work while I'm on the train. So hopefully that was the one of the biggest takeaways today. But I also want to say to our dear audience, thank you so much for all the questions. And we'll be back same time tomorrow, right, Dan?
We will. We have 2 more chapters. So before then, if you're interested in just going through what we covered here, again, there's those assignments in chapter 1 and 2 of the course. So feel free to dive into that. Again, you can get to the repo here, this GitHub gh.io link, or you can get to the course here, which will also have a link to the repo. So 2 options for you, but feel free to do that. And then if you just went to YouTube or LinkedIn directly and you want to kind of get notified about the session tomorrow, and then Chris and I have 2 more next week, also Wednesday, Thursday, I think, then feel free to go sign up for that. Then you'll get the reminders and things like that. So with that, Chris and I thank you. Really appreciate you making time out of your busy day. As Chris mentioned, tomorrow, same time, same place. We're going to jump into chapters 3 and 4 and get into agents and development workflows and some really cool stuff. So thanks for joining us. And Chris, thanks so much for making time to join me.
Yeah, absolutely. Any day, Dan. All right. See you tomorrow, folks.
See y'all.
Thank you all for joining, and thanks again to our speakers. This session is a part of a series. To register for future shows and watch past episodes on demand, you can follow the link on the screen or in the chat. We're always looking to improve our sessions and your experience. If you have any feedback for us, we would love to hear what you have to say. You can find that link on the screen or in the chat. And we'll see you at the next one.